back, everybody. Acts part 2, lesson number 6. This is video number 2, so we're picking up the end of Acts chapter 21, and we'll go through chapter 22 today. So we see that Paul is in the temple. You actually get more insight of what's going to happen here and what does occur here in the next lesson, okay? But pay attention to all the details. Paul comes into the temple, and it's actually the time of purification, so he has access to it. Well, there's Jews there from Asia, and they're there stirring up the people. Well, why are they stirring up the people? Why are the Jews there from Asia? Well, remember, Paul had wanted to get to Jerusalem in time for Pentecost. He wanted to be there when there would be a large crowd gathering for the feast where he could speak forth of the resurrection of the dead, where he could speak forth of Messiah. And so these Jews were there celebrating the feast. Well, why were they stirring up the people? Well, they thought that Paul had brought a Gentile into the temple. These Jews from Asia were likely from Ephesus because they saw Paul literally out in the city with Trophimus, and Trophimus called Trophimus the Ephesian. So he's from Ephesus. And so they saw him, and they just made the assumption that Paul had taken him into the temple. So often man does that, just makes an assumption. Well, they create this stirring and this riot. Well, Paul is rescued by the Romans, and as he's rescued by the Romans, he looks at the commander and he says, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" Well, he asked him a question, and he asked him a question in Greek. Well, the commander looks back and says, "You speak Greek?" Well, it wasn't a dumb response. He was just dumbfounded because he thought that Paul might have been an Egyptian they were looking for. Remember, you read it in your homework this week. You read the account that there was a leader of a group called the Assassins that had stirred up quite a bit of trouble, and the group had taken off into the wilderness, but they were still looking for the leader, and this commander thought that Paul might have been that leader. When he was speaking to him in Greek, he realized, no, this is not him. And Paul actually described himself a little bit. He says, "Oh, I'm a Jew. This is who I am." And then Paul said, "Can I speak to these folks?" Because the rabble had sort of followed, the group had followed them. And the commander said, "Well, okay." So Paul turns around and he speaks to them in the Hebrew dialect. And that's sort of interesting because people say, "Oh, well, he spoke to the Jewish people in Hebrew." More than likely, no. He probably spoke in what's called Jewish Aramaic. The language of the Jewish people that day was Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic. He also spoke Hebrew and spoke Greek. So Paul probably spoke to them in their common language. He may have spoke to them in Hebrew, but the way that it says the Hebrew dialect makes me think that he spoke to them in the language that their common language. Also, I'm thinking if he spoke in Hebrew, he would have come across as one of the Hebrew leaders, one of the Pharisees and that type of thing, and he didn't want to do that. So we see in chapter 22 that he literally just gave an accounting of who he was. He says, "I'm a Jew, just like you." And he says, gave him his heritage, his background, his training. And remember, he sat under Gamaliel. He was the rising star of Judaism, of Phariseeism. And sometimes we forget this, particularly when we read these chapters, we do well to remember that Paul, and you saw in just the things in this chapter and the next chapter, he knew these people. They would have gone to school together. Okay, the high priest at this time, and Paul actually says something about this. You say later on, he'll say, "You can go ask them about it because they were there when this happened 20 years ago." They would have known one another. They would have gone to school together. But here is Paul, likely the rising star of Judaism, who is struck down by the power of the Most High God. So now it's 20 years later. He says, "You know how I used to be. I persecuted the way. You can ask them about it. They gave me the papers to go off and do these kind of things." But then he told of his conversion. He told what happened and how this light struck him and he's on the ground, literally blinded by it. And he hears the voice of the Lord, and the Lord tells him what to do. And how he goes to Damascus and how Ananias lays hands upon him and tells him what all is going to happen to him. And how the Lord has called him. And the people were just amazed by this. They were totally quiet. Okay? And he told him Paul told the people all that occurred to him. He actually told them how he went back to Jerusalem. An interesting little thing here. Apparently he went back to Jerusalem and he was praying in the temple. And he had a vision. The Lord says, "You need to get out of here right now because the people are not going to receive what you have to say." And Paul sort of argued a little bit with the Lord. He said, "Well, Lord, they will know who I was and what I have been doing and now how I've been changed." And he says, "No, you need to go. Get out of here, and you need to go to the Gentiles." Well, the second Paul said, "Go to the Gentiles." The Jews quit listening. That's when they started screaming and demanding his death. Well, the Romans grabbed him, and they thought, "We got to find out what's going on here." And so, well, how do Romans find out what's going on? Well, they're going to they're going to scourge him. They're going to put him on a rack and stretch him until he, tells them the truth about things. Well, as they're preparing to do all this kind of stuff, Paul just looks at the folks and says, "Hey, do you do this to a Roman who's been uncondemned?" To start with, they wouldn't do it to a condemned Roman. Okay. Well, the commander was amazed. He thought, man, I am in trouble now because I have put a Roman citizen in chains. And then he finds out that Paul was born a Roman citizen. The commander said, hey, I bought this. Now, this commander, he was a commander of 1,000 people. That was his actual little title right there. So there's at least 1,000 soldiers here, which gives some insight and some things which we won't go through right now. Well, commander said, I got to find out what's going on with this. So the next day, the commander ordered and demanded that the Jewish leadership that they assemble together because he's going to find out what's going on here. I find that interesting. We'll look at that more in the next video, what happens in chapter 23. But the leadership of the Jewish people and this commander and the Romans were working so hand in glove that the Roman commander felt like that he could order them to assemble. And you know what? They did. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.